This QuireCast podcast is brought to you by Inking Christ, a theological approach to tattoos by Dr. Justin Scoggins. This book is an invitation to view tattoos not as marks of rebellion or mere decoration, but as sacred symbols that narrate the story of one's faith and life journey. Dr. Scoggins' aim is to inspire believers to embrace the artistry of tattoos as a legitimate and meaningful form of worship, reflecting the beauty and love of Christ in a unique and personal manner. Pick it up today on Amazon.
Welcome to the Unbelief Podcast, your journey, actually our journey together beyond inherited beliefs to a spirituality that works for you. I'm your host, Jeremy. I'm a deep skeptic, also a pastor. We can fix that later, right? No? Congratulations, you've made it to another book club episode of the Unbelief Podcast. We're going to talk about Genesis, and specifically a part of the Genesis story that is sort of the beginning of the Abraham story, continuing on from our last week. So we're going to start in Genesis chapter 13. So the question here is, will God keep the promise? The promise to Abraham to make his name great, to make him wealthy, and to have all of these descendants. And we start right at the beginning. It shows that like God is starting to keep God's promise. It says, now Abraham was rich in livestock, silver, and gold. And so we get the sense of like, that's what's happening. And he's getting so wealthy, having so much livestock that he and his nephew Lot are going to have to sort of part ways. And they've got to figure out which part of the land that they're going to have. He lets Lot choose, and Lot chooses the part of the land that is nicer, that has the water and all of the things that you want in an agrarian culture like the culture in which they live. And Abram gets the other part, and God says, okay, this is going to be great. You're going to have all of this land. And he's sort of, and that's where it's like, yes, the promise is being fulfilled. And then there's this quick note at the end of, verse 13, talking about where Lot lived. It's like this foreshadowing. It says, now the people of Sodom were wicked, great sinners against the Lord. And just a little piece, because this is where Lot is headed. This people of Sodom were wicked. It's like, okay, here it goes. And so God says, okay, Abram, look out. Everywhere you see, this is the land that I'm giving you. And right now, the land is occupied by other powers. But in the future, this is going to be yours. And so chapter 13 has this, I don't know, really sort of introduction. Okay, is this happening? Yes, it's happening. And so we go forward from chapter 13 into chapter 14. So there's a big group of kings that takes Abram's nephew, and we have this. Abram gets word that this long list of kings from Zoar and all these people, they capture Lot, Abram's nephew that they sort of in the last chapter had just parted ways. And then it says Abram heard that his nephew had been taken captive. This is in verse 14. He led forth his trained men born in his house. And now here's the important thing. These are the trained men, not all the men. He leads these trained men out, and there is 318 of them. And this is a huge number, obviously, but this gives you a scope of how wealthy Abram is gotten, that in his household, these are not actual, these aren't descendants of Abram, but in his household, under his employment, all of those kind of things, there are 318 trained men. So Abram is wealthy. He is a leader, and he is amassing a huge household and enormous amounts of wealth. And it says he led them and went in pursuit of the people who had captured Lot. This is like the first time we see this, but there is a role in this ancient Near Eastern culture that's called the role of the Goel, or the kinsman redeemer. And so the Goel, the kinsman redeemer, has a lot of extra duties. And so it is generally, the kinsman redeemer is generally the firstborn in any household. So the firstborn, when the previous firstborn, the firstborn's father, dies, the firstborn of that father becomes the kinsman redeemer, the Goel. And the Goel has all kinds of important things that they are supposed to do, different tasks. And because they have a bunch of extra things that they're supposed to do, they get a double of their share of the inheritance. And that one of the things that they are to do is that when somebody gets in a hard place, they are supposed to help them out physically or financially. If they have to sell an important thing in order to cover their bills, the kinsman redeemer is supposed to go and buy that thing back for the relative, so that relative can continue to have this sort of family heirloom. It's also that if a relative gets in such a place where they become enslaved, the kinsman redeemer is supposed to go to the person who owns that slave, owns their relative, and buy them back out of slavery, redeem them from slavery. And if someone is captured, it's on, right? The kinsman redeemer is going to go and get them back. And that was so important in this role that even if you didn't have enough money to buy them back, the kinsman redeemer was supposed to offer himself in exchange for his kinsman. He's supposed to put himself in that place if the price of this kinsman was more than he could afford. Now, that's not going to be Abram's problem, because we've already seen that he is very rich. And that's what we see Abram do. He goes and he chases the parties down that have captured Lot, and he takes his army down to do that, to bring him back. And it says he goes and in pursuit as far as Dan. And there's actually, archaeologists have found ancient Dan. It's one of the most well-preserved sites. If you Google archaeology and Dan, you can see this massive structure that they have uncovered. And this is where Abram pursues the people who have captured his nephew Lot. And he and his servants win. And it says he wins. He's going to get Lot back, but he brought back all of the goods with him as well. So they not only had captured Lot, they had taken a bunch of the things that Lot had owned and brings them back. Now, I don't like to baptize ancient culture and act like we should do everything the way that ancient cultures did it. But this piece, this idea of a kinsman redeemer, that there is someone in the world to rescue you when things get hard, man, that is an interesting and like alluring. And it happens today often with parents when their kids get in a tough place. They will rescue them. They will bail them out. They will help them get their life together. They will give them money or, all kinds of different pieces. It definitely happens in some ways in our culture. And for a lot of people, it's government assistance that does that for them. But there is this beautiful way of thinking about it and seeing it, in that it is the role of one of your siblings, the role of someone in your life to really just be looking out for you. And it's something that we can practice, though. We may not have the ability to bail people out of all of the bad things, but to be able to say that, you know what? These people, my friends, my family, my chosen family, whatever it is, I am going to be a kinsman redeemer for them. I am going to pay attention to their life. And when it is possible for me to help them out, I am going to help them out. Follow Abraham's example of being a kinsman redeemer and saying, whoa, this person, they've gotten in a difficult place. I'm going to go to them. I'm going to go find them in the dark place, in the mistake that they've made, and I'm not going to judge them. I'm going to go because I am taking on this role as helper for my friends and my family and those people I love. And it may be something small or it may be a big thing, but always to be sensitive to people and how you say, I can help them with whatever you have, being that person in other people's lives, the person that they know they can call on, and they know that even if they haven't asked, that person will show up for them. Man, that is a powerful role that you can play in the lives of others. And if you want to talk about what we are talking about when we talk about spiritual beliefs, the beliefs that work for you and beliefs that help you find a purpose greater than yourself, this is one of them. Yeah. The role of the kinsman redeemer. You can find this purpose without job requirements, without schooling, without any of that. You can say, no. I am going to make my life in part about helping my tribe of people, my family, my friends, my chosen family. I'm going to find this as my role. Then there is this weird thing where a guy named Melchizedek shows up with the king of Sodom. So king of Sodom is like, we had just heard that Sodom was wicked and evil. And it says the king of Sodom goes out to meet Abram. And because we know that the king of Sodom is supposedly wicked, the idea and what you're supposed to get from this is like, oh my gosh, the king of Sodom's coming out. There's going to be another fight, another war. And the king of Sodom comes out to meet Abram. And it says then, and the King Melchizedek of Salem brought bread and wine. He was a priest of the God Most High. And this is really an interesting note here that Melchizedek, he's not with Abram. And yet it implies that Melchizedek is actually a priest of the God of Abram, the God who called Abram out of his homeland and into this place that is the promised land. It's called the promised land because in these chapters, God promises this to Abram. So he goes to the promised land and this king is living in that land, King Melchizedek of Salem. And what we see is that Sodom, the king of Sodom and this king Melchizedek, this King Melchizedek says that he's a priest of the Most High, which for people who are assuming that the only person that God has been talking to was Abram, it's really clear that God is actually engaged with multiple people at this time, which some will talk about being an indication that God, the God of the Bible, the God of the Jews, the God of the Christians, isn't just talking to the Jews or the Christians. The God of the Bible is actually talking to everyone. And the implication may be that God is always talking to everyone. God is always talking to everyone if they will listen. Because King Melchizedek, not part of Abram's family, not going to be part of Abram's family or his descendants. And the God Most High, the God that has been engaged with Abram, is talking to him. Now, the other way to look at this is multiple gods, which is also possible. The Bible in these early phases just implies, just straight out recognizes that there are multiple gods. And because it calls the God of Abraham, the God of gods, the Lord of lords, the God Most High. And so the other idea is that Melchizedek is worshiping another God that he calls the God Most High. So that's another option for how to understand this. But either way, either is saying that there's multiple God and it's recognizing that, or I think most likely the one that seems to resonate with me is that God Most High is the same God of Abram, and Melchizedek is already talking to him. And then Abram, it says, gives him 1/10 of everything. And the king of Sodom said to Abram, give me persons, but take goods for yourself. And it says, but Abram said to the king of Sodom, I have sworn to God Most High. See, this is the same phrasing as when it's talking about who Melchizedek is a priest for. I have sworn to the God Most High, maker of heaven and earth, that I would not take a thread or sandal strap or anything that is yours, so that you might not say I have made Abram rich. Because what it's saying is that like Abram is really trusting this promise of God, and that this promise of God is going to make him rich, and he doesn't have to do sketchy things. He just has to be faithful, and that will happen. And so far, that's what's happened. So far, it says that Abram has amassed an enormous amount of wealth and an enormous amount of power and influence. And so Abram leaves this transaction, and we get to the next part of the story. But I think we do need to pause here for just a moment to recognize again that one of the deep truths in this moment is it is okay to respect other religions, to engage with people who have different religious practices, and to honor them, not just by engaging, but in participating with them, however it is that they open themselves up to be participated with. It says, after all these things, in chapter 15, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. Do not be afraid, Abram. I am your shield. Your reward shall be very great. And then Abram says, okay, God, look, I know that you've given me all kinds of stuff. You've started to explain, or you've started to make good on your promise, but God, I don't have any kids. And you remember in our last podcast episode, a couple of chapters ago, when it introduced Abram's wife, Sarah, that Abram's wife was barren. So Abram said, look, you haven't given me offspring, so I'm going to let a slave that is in my house be my heir. And in a sense, it feels like Abram is like challenging God here. And that's important because a lot of people will think that like, if you're a religious person, that somehow the way that you interact with God or the universe or whatever has got to be overly reverent. It's got to be always positive, almost like toxic positivity. And you just got to believe everything. But here we see Abram say, hey, you and I had a deal. I left my home and I came down here and you promised me a lot of descendants, a lot of children. And I've got zero. I've got zero because the wife that I have is sterile, is not able to have children. And so what's up, God? I love that because I don't know if you're the same way as me, but if I think that there's something that God should do and God didn't do it, it really pisses me off. And Abram here is an example of saying, like, sure, if you are a person that prays to a God, be open, be honest, be like, God, what the heck? My life is sucking right now. I feel like it shouldn't be this way. You got to be honest. You can push back on God, at least the God in the Bible. Because though Abram is the first to do it, many, many people do it over and over again. And so it says God speaks to him and God says, this man shall not be your heir. No one but your very own issue, your very own child shall be your heir. And then God brings Abram outside and he says, okay, look up at the heavens. If you can count the stars, tell me. And then the Lord says, so shall your descendants be. And it says in Abram, and he believed the Lord, and the Lord reckoned the Lord saw these things, this belief in Abram as righteousness. And this is an interesting way of phrasing it, because what it's saying is that God didn't see Abram as righteous. Like, he doesn't have inherent righteousness, inherent perfection, that he's not just automatically a good person, but that this act by Abram was righteous. And that's an interesting way of talking about rightness, about being a good person, where you say, you know what, I am not perfect. I'm not a person that you can just say is automatically righteous. That's not me, and that's never going to be me. But I can do right things. It's this idea that you can give up on ever thinking you're going to be the perfect person all of the time, and instead focus on what you're doing right now. Focus in on saying, no. I'm not thinking that I'm going to try to be a perfect person all the time, but today, in this moment, I'm going to try to do the right thing. I'm going to try to do the good thing. And that is worth pursuing. Yeah, that's worth pursuing. Then he says, look, then God keeps speaking, and God says, like, okay, I brought you out of your homelands and to give you this land to possess. Abram again says, okay, God, I get it, but like, how am I to know that this shall pass? And then we get an ancient ritual that seems really weird, but if you know what this ancient ritual is in this culture, it's incredibly powerful. God asks Abram to bring a heifer that is 3 years old, a female goat that is 3 years old, a ram that is 3 years old, a turtle dove, and a young pigeon. And I'm just going to give you a content warning. This is going to talk about animal sacrifice. And so if that's something that is really bothers you, I get it. Take care of yourself. If you're listening to the podcast, just skip. You can do the next podcast. It's okay. But what God says is, okay, take these animals, cut them in half, and lay them out on the ground with their halves open. And this is a ritual that was practiced by multiple in this culture, and some have called it the blood path. But what happens is when somebody is making a contract, especially a contract between a superior and an inferior person. And what the contract does is the person who is the superior, the person is sort of helping out, like the king who is going to give somebody land or money or whatever. The king stands on one side, that person of higher status, and the person of lower status stands on the other side of these animals that have been split in half and laid out with a bloody path in the middle. And the person who is lower is to walk the blood path to the person that is of higher status. And when they do that, they're saying, if I don't make good on my promise with this covenant that I'm making with you, may what happened to these animals happen to me. Like, this is going to be my punishment. It's a very vivid imagery when you're walking the blood path, saying, okay, I got to be serious about making up my end of this agreement. But it's not the other way around, because it's assumed that the rich person, the wealthy person, the person with more status is going to do the thing that they're going to do, because they've got so much wealth and power. They can just do whatever it is that they have sort of said was going to be their side. Give the money, give influence, give power, whatever. They're going to do it. It's probably going to happen right away. And then this person is going to have to pay it back in some way. And if they don't, this ritual is saying, I am accepting this on my own. I will have what happened to these animals happen to me. I will pay for my lack of making good on my promise with my own physical harm and my own physical danger. So that's the ritual. But this ritual happens differently. And people in this ancient culture would have gasped would have been amazed. So in Genesis chapter 15, verse 12, it says, as the sun was going down, a deep sleep fell upon Abram, and a deep, terrifying darkness descended on him. And the Lord said to Abram, know this for certain, that your offspring shall be aliens in a land that is not theirs, shall be slaves there, and they shall be oppressed for 400 years, but I will bring judgment on the nation that they serve. And afterwards they shall come out with great possessions. This is foreshadowing the Exodus event and the slavery in Egypt. And it says, as for yourself, you shall go to your ancestors in peace. When you die, you will go to heaven or whatever. You shall be buried at a good old age, and they shall come back here to the fourth generation, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete. And then it says, when the sun had gone down and it was dark, a smoking fire pot and a flaming torch passed between the animals, between the pieces. So this is the weird part. Remember, this ritual is to certify a covenant, an agreement, a contract between a superior person and an inferior person. And the inferior person is going to walk the blood path to the superior person. And when they do, they're saying, let what happened to these animals happen to me if I don't fulfill my end of the bargain, the covenant. But here, you would expect that what is about to happen is Abram saying, if I don't keep my end of the covenant, Abram's going to walk the blood path to God and is going to be saying, let what happened to these animals happen to me if I'm not faithful to you. That's not what happens, is it? There's a symbol, a flaming torch and a smoking fire pot that passes between the pieces of the animals. And it's God saying, I am so serious about this covenant with you that even though I'm a superior being, let what happened to these animals happen to me if I don't make up my end of the covenant. God will pay for that in God's body, whatever that means. But a seriousness to this, that God, Abram has been, I don't know, where are my kids? You keep saying this about descendants. I have no descendants. My wife is not able to bear children. What gives? And God is saying, no, 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 no. I will be faithful. I will give you an heir. And this is how serious this covenant is that God is making with Abram. Wow. Wow. And so as God makes this covenant, Abram is standing there and God again says, to your descendants, I will give this land. And it tells the sort of demarcation of the land, and the chapter ends. Now, some people want to say that this is about Jesus. It's not about Jesus necessarily, because there is nothing in this text that references a Messiah, references anything like that. And though the New Testament writers might call back to some of these moments, in the original people who heard it would not be thinking of this. The original people who heard this would be actually a lot later than this story. They would already have been a nation, and they would say, okay, the reason we've made it, the reason we've stuck around for so long is because this God has made good on God's covenant with Abram. And so for us, when we're trying to figure out what this means for our everyday life, I think there's a couple of things. One, it is that we can have confidence in whatever it is that we feel like God has said to us. And there's this belief that can form out of this, that there is a seriousness between God and people and that relationship that is more than just a light, like, yeah, God cares about you or about me. This is saying to us, okay, God doesn't just care. God is going to make promises to us. God is going to make good on those promises to us. God is going to be with us. And I don't know about you, but if that's a belief that I can have, that God is going to be with me, God is going to sort of have my back, that feels like a healthy belief. Feels like a healthy belief because it helps when you're lonely, when you feel like your life isn't giving you what you feel like you've been promised. It helps you think critically and say, okay, I feel like my life isn't where it needs to be. So what's next for me? The very next chapter is about Ishmael. And this chapter is important because Ishmael is seen by the Islamic people to be their story. And that is for the next podcast. So now if you are watching live our podcast recording, then let's talk a little bit about, I'm going to answer some of your questions in the chat. So let's talk, let me hear these questions. Yeah. So, oh, great. I see we've got several people that are calling me a liberal, masquerading as a Christ follower. Thanks so much. Being led astray. This is awesome. So, and young Lascivious, I would say you're right. I think that God requires skepticism. I feel like doubts and questions are a sign of spiritual health. That's not an uncommon thing in the Bible. There are lots of people with doubts and questions. We just heard that Abram actually was doubting whether or not God was going to make good on God's covenant, right? That's a huge doubt. I have those same kinds of doubts. I have those same kinds of questions. And for me, it helps me feel like I'm being healthy in my relationship with God, because if you have doubts and questions, it means you are seriously engaging with the text, with your relationship with God, the universe, whatever. And that's actually what we do in our Discord group. We call it Not Church. We call it Not Church because one of our members said, hey, it's like church, but it's not church. We are processing all of our doubts, all of our questions, all of our spiritual stuff together in a community. We're doing all the things, discussion and holding space for each other when things go bad and just screaming into the void, right? Just airing our frustrations. We're doing all of that, and nobody in there is telling you you're going to hell because you don't believe the right thing. We're all on this journey together towards spiritual beliefs that work for us, spiritual beliefs that help us be the best version of ourselves, spiritual beliefs that help us find a purpose greater than ourselves. And if that sounds interesting to you, you should definitely be part of it. You can go to my Patreon page, patreon.com/skepticpastor, and it costs $3 a month. It costs $3 a month because I'm not going to be asking anybody to give me 10% of their income. This gig is you pay for what you get. And if it doesn't keep working for you, if you feel like, oh, that was fun, but now I'm done with it, you just stop paying. So I would love to have you part of that Not Church community. We have a great time together in there and are really supporting each other. And if you like this podcast, we would really appreciate it if you give us a 4 stars, 5 stars, whatever the highest thing is, and write a little comment saying, yeah, this is great. That always really helps us out. That's it. That's the podcast. Shout out to the Choir Network, to Patheos, to Matthew and Keith, who make everything happen. Now, get out of here. Go do something to make the world a better place. Okay? We'll see you next time.